In the face of these predatory tactics, it makes sense, obviously, to take precautionary measures to protect yourself because you're doing something unpopular. And many of you are no doubt doing this already via different methods. Yet, if the very operating system that you're using, for instance, can't be trusted, then how can you guarantee that it isn't actively working against you? The nature of non-free software is such that you can never know what it's really doing because you can't inspect it or investigate it or query it. And what's more, you can't pay anybody else or defer to an expert to do that job either because they can't legally get access to the source code either. Many non-free software applications are actively seeking new sources of revenue, including selling profiles of user behavior, selling your computer processing power to research companies, selling reports of applications that you've installed, and selling opportunities to put adware and marketing on your machine. The only way to protect yourself from untrustworthy software like this is to use free software, because without being able to study the code of the software that you're using, you can't guarantee what it's doing. This is why the German government, for instance, is the primary sponsor of email cryptography software, and why many national intelligence organizations, including the CIA and the NSA in the States, use free software because that's the only way they can guarantee the security of what they're doing. But also, it's not just about protecting yourself, and that's a bit of a stick approach, which is, I don't want to, take the negative angle, because participation is also something that's pretty unique about the way that I, for instance, use free software. And after all, the tools that you use have to be easy and feature-rich in order for them to be viable, because after all, efficiency at the end of the day is generally most people's motive in what they choose, right? Because you're doing repetitive tasks, whether it be downloading torrents or browsing or listening to music. And that's why it's so important that free software is developed in a radically different way to proprietary software. Whilst this isn't true of all projects, in general, free software developers are regular users of the software that they're making. They are more aware of the needs of their users often. They're more concerned with the quality of the software because they use it themselves. And they're more invested in the longevity of their software. Because if they switch the company that they're working for, the contract, then they're probably still going to be using what they wrote, which originally usually met their own needs. Also, they're often more accessible to users. For instance, I can email directly most of the core developers of the applications that I rely on, and I get responses. I can't do that with, I could never do that. I could never even dream of doing that with the proprietary software that I used to rely on. Furthermore, over time, popular free software applications become more stable and more secure and robust because it's a cumulative process, and it's not a process which is subject to marketing agendas or the necessity to release another 3.0 or 2009 or anti-features, for instance. Therefore, using free software does not mean using poorer quality software, nor should it mean using less user-friendly software. Often quite the opposite is true. And today, the proof of this is that free software is used by billions of people around the world for all kinds of purposes, including GNU Linux being used by hundreds of millions of people, particularly in classrooms and in local government. And as was just mentioned in the previous talk, freedom boxes. The freedom in a freedom box is the free software. And I'm actually working on that project because I think it's very important. But the most important thing is the freedom, not the features, in my opinion. And it's important to remember that when you start with freedom, you can end with features, but if you start with features, you rarely end with freedom. It's possible to be a person who complains about the problems with proprietary software in forums without actually having a hope of it being recognized or anything happening about it. Companies like Creative are famous for this. They produce MP3 players, and then customers want a new feature, or they want support for a different platform. And even when hundreds of thousands of their users complain to them in different forms, they're not obliged to do anything about it. Yet with free software, that situation couldn't really arise, because so long as there's a need and so long as there's skills, then whatever people need will generally arise, because the power is in the user's hands, not in the hands of the owner. Free software is the embodiment of participation, in fact. It thrives on it at every level, in terms of how you learn about it, the free materials, in terms of the support mechanism, which is all peer-to-peer, generally speaking. And it provides opportunities to affect the software that you use and mold it to your needs, which proprietary software never could. Investing your time in learning and contributing to free technologies that your children can enjoy, for instance, and that your school and university can use without worrying about the price tag, without worrying about vendor lock-in, If you already know about an application, then it makes it far easier for the people that you rely on, like your school or university, to use it also. And it's a cumulative process, as I've mentioned, which perpetually builds and improves, so long as there's a community around that application in particular. So I'm short on time, so I'm just going to finish off with some information about me and what I'm doing at the moment with the FSFE. I'm recently instated as the British coordinator. I'm based in Manchester. I'm working with the FSFE to promote free software in all aspects of society that I have time to. We're part of an international network of free software foundations, including ones in the United States and in South America and in India. And the history of these organizations stretches back about 30 years. We do things like challenging governments over spending on dead-end contracts, like, for instance, the NHS Spine project, which ended up costing the taxpayer more than £20 billion. And we do things like trying to stop governments promoting software monopolies like Adobe Reader, for instance, which take users' rights and don't respect their privacy. We're almost entirely a volunteer-run organization, and we rely on donations of time and money to keep us going. We as citizens face many threats, and being forced to use software for work and education that tramples our privacy and security underfoot is not the only one. Billions in public money is being spent, as I've said, on software which we don't own. At the end of it, we can't maintain, and which is basically very often a gravy train for whoever provided the initial contract. And software patents and laws are strangling innovation, which mean that only existing established companies in particular fields can continue to innovate so long as it proves profitable for them. And it means third world countries, for instance, can't compete in these new arising sectors because patents on incredibly broad terms are already owned by American holding companies. Centralized online services that stockpile our data, like Facebook, and hand control of the internet to a handful of American corporations are also an enormous concern which we're facing at the moment. If you want to find out more about free software, I'm at the back of the room. I've got some leaflets and flyers, things like why you should promote the concept in your school or university. I've got some t-shirts and such. Get familiar with good free software applications in the area that you're using. There are lots. There's alternatives for most things. You can join our fellowship program, which has local groups in different cities around the UK. We're trying to pressure local governments into different things, working with groups surrounding open data to get things like public transportation information more available and accessible to people. And that's it. I guess we don't have any time for questions.